The 2024 Polyglot Gathering is brought to you by Glossica.
I think we can start now. Hello, everyone. My name is Rafał. There will be also a slide about myself, but a piece of information for you. So my talk will be in English, and the slides will also be in English and in the international sign. So here's some information about me. My sign name is this one, and I'm 26 years old. And 4 years ago, I started learning PJM, which stands for Polish Sign Language. It comes from the Polish, polski język migowy, so PJM. I've graduated from the University of Warsaw's master's program in the Polish Sign Language Philology, and now I'm pursuing my PhD at the University of Warsaw as well. I'm finishing my second year. And apart from the PJM, I've also learned some international sign, American Sign Language, and a bunch of other sign languages, but mostly I'm communicative in the Polish Sign Language. So the title of my talk today is What Grammar is There in Sign Languages? But first of all, we have to answer the question, what are sign languages? I think some of you already know something about sign languages in general, but they are defined as full-fledged, complex, and natural visual languages which have their own grammar, vocabulary, and variation. They're used mostly by deaf communities, but there are also some local communities which have their own sign languages used only in these local communities because the percentage of the deaf people who live in these communities is significantly higher than in the normal population. So for example, there is, I didn't sign it in the video, but there is a sign language in Indonesia which is called kata-kolok, and there is also, there has been also a sign language used on the island of Martha Vineyard near Massachusetts, the US, and so on. So the next question is, are sign languages just a random combination of signs? No, not at all. So in 1960s, an American linguist called William Stokoe was the first researcher to acknowledge sign languages as full languages. He worked as a teacher at the Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C., which is one of the only universities in the today's world where lectures are held in a sign language, in this case in American Sign Language. But before 1960s, they were considered a poor version of spoken languages or just a random combination of gesture and pantomime. But in sign languages, as in spoken languages, we can have grammatical and ungrammatical sentences. So here are a few examples from the American Sign Language. The first one is the grammatical one, and it comes now. So, 4 boys from deaf school are chatting. So 4 boy from deaf school chat. This is a grammatical sentence. But in a grammatical one, here it comes, 4 boys from Chad deaf school. This is ungrammatical. It doesn't make sense because the verb just comes, it just breaks into a different phrase, a different syntagma. So, in sign languages, we can have both ungrammatical and grammatical sentences. Next one comes from the Polish Sign Language, which means Here it goes. Your uncle job quit. Why? Okay, so why did your uncle quit his job? Normally, the order of the signs would be like this, but here we have a non-grammatical sentence. Your why uncle job quit. And this sentence is also ungrammatical, and the word order is just messed up, similar to this American example. So we'll walk through some of the topics related to sign language grammar. So when it comes to word order, some researchers think that, or claim constituent word orders for various sign languages, for example, SVO for the American Sign Language or the Belgian French Sign Language, or SOV, subject, object, verb, for the Italian and German sign languages. However, some researchers just think that word order in sign languages is more related to pragmatics in context and information structure, topic, comment. So topic is a piece of information that we already know, and comment is a new piece of information that we want to add. So here are some examples from the American Sign Language with this topic, comment structure. So next week, future, see Bill. I'll see Bill next week. And the other one, no Bill, future, see next week. I'll see Bill next week. As you can see, the information is the same, but the structure is different. In the first sentence, the topic was next week, and the new piece of information was future, see Bill, so I will see Bill. But in the second sentence, the topic comment structure is the other way around. So we had know Bill, so do you know Bill? This is a known piece of information. And future, see next week, I'll see Bill next week. So I will see him next week. That's a new piece of information. Next topic is negatives. They can be expressed manually and non-manually, and also simultaneously, manually and non-manually. Because in sign languages, we don't only use our hands, but we also use non-manual markers, mostly on the face, such as brows or face expressions. Next example comes from the Lithuanian Sign Language, which is LGK, Lietuvių gestų kalba. Exam ticket, I pull out, I know. So I pull out an exam sheet, I know it. So I know the answer to the question on the exam sheet. So in this example, we had a sign to know in the Lithuanian Sign Language. It's an affirmative verb. And here comes a different example. I about that man, his life and issues, his, I don't know. He is mysterious, or he mystery. I don't know about this man's life and what he does. He's mysterious. So we could see know and don't know. In this case, we have different forms of an affirmative verb and a negative verb. There are only a couple of verbs in various sign languages that do behave that way. So, for example, it also happens in Polish Sign Language. We have to know and don't know. So the negation looks different. And the other example comes from the Polish Sign Language, which is McDonald's there eat not healthy. So in this case, a negative was expressed by non-manual elements because I signed healthy and with a head shake, which is not healthy. But the manual part was the same one. The next thing is agreement verbs. They are agreed according to the subject and the object of a sentence. This is like the simplified explanation of what agreement verbs in sign languages are. For example, in American Sign Language, flowers I give to you, and book you give to me. So I give something to you and you give something to me. I can also sign these two things simultaneously with both hands. Yes, so that's an example with the verb to give. And when it comes to questions, they also can have manual and non-manual markers. And usually the question words are put at the end of a sentence. It happens in various sign languages. And the next example comes also from the Lithuanian sign language, lietuvių gestų kalba. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, I want to show it. You iron, unplug already. Have you unplugged the iron? Okay, so one thing here, it also happens, for example, in Polish Sign Language, like the sign in Lithuanian Sign Language means already. In Polish, we have this one. And actually, this sign is also used for a perfective aspect of verbs to indicate that an activity is finished already. And this is the question word, so it's put at the end of the sentence. The next question is, world end will be. So will the end of the world happen? I actually took these sentences from a Lithuanian Sign Language dictionary. That's why they may be a little bit weird. But yes, you can also see that apart from the manual sign, which is will be, there is also a different face expression. So usually, and there's also an explanation in the next video. Hopefully it works. Or not. Okay. Oh, it works, sorry. This is from the Japanese Sign Language. Work what? So as you can see, if we have a yes-no question, so a question that we can just answer yes or no, the eyebrows are usually going upwards. And if we have a question with a WH word, for example, what, when, who, and so on, the eyebrows tend to be frowned, but that's not the case in all sign languages. For example, it happens in the American Sign Language or the Japanese Sign Language, but not in all sign languages we have this distinction between frowning and raising your eyebrows. But the non-manual markers of questions tend to be quite similar to each other. The next thing is, actually this last thing, these are classifiers. So classifiers are hand shapes that represent location or movement of different objects, or they can also represent hands interacting with objects. So we have two different types of classifiers. We also have a different type which is called shape and size specifiers, but I did not include that in the video. An example from the Polish Sign Language: a ball, apple, inside, and a classifier. So this hand shape is a classifier, and actually it represents a hand putting in the apples. And also, these classifiers need to be specified usually before the classifier itself, because out of the context, we are usually not able to tell what these classifiers mean. So, for example, if I let me see. Okay, so for example, this classifier is used for human beings, so this hand shape. But if I use let's say this classifier, so it can mean a bunch of different things. Depending on the context, it may mean a car or some like flat object like a book or a notebook or something similar. That is in this shape. And then the other example, also from the Polish Sign Language, is today, way, car, there, car. So the car traffic today is heavy. So this is a classifier that I used for indicating the cars or the car traffic, but I added some movement to tell what happens with these cars. And to wrap things up, as you can see, sign languages, of course, do have grammar. They have different factors and different elements of these grammar. And now comes the part with questions and answers. I encourage you to ask me some questions, and thank you very much. Wow, okay, we already have some questions, thank you. Any tips for a beginner? Okay, are there different? Okay, any tips for beginners in the sign language? Actually, I had a talk about it last year, but in a few words. I would recommend that if you haven't learned any sign language beforehand, and if you haven't had any contact with the deaf community, actually it's not so easy to find your place in the deaf community because of different factors. Well, the best tip I could give you is to find a course of your local sign language, so where you live right now, and when you plan to stay for a couple of years. And the best thing you can do is to find a course with a deaf teacher for different reasons. The first one is that the deaf teachers are usually also native signers or near native signers, because not all deaf people use sign language natively. But this kind of teachers I think it's the best kind of a teacher you can get, because you can also immediately try to switch from the spoken language to a sign language, and not to use your spoken language. So of course, if we use different sign languages, we also use the so-called mouthings. So these are like the lip movements borrowed from the spoken language of the ambience. But it really helps you to learn a sign language quicker. And also, I think the hardest part, especially for hearing people who are not used to sign languages yet, is to switch your main reception channel, because with spoken languages, when we talk to each other, we receive information by ear, and in sign languages, we have to receive things by eyes. Okay, so it's our side channel is working here. So I don't know if I answered that question precisely, but yes, if not, then we can also talk about it later. So the next question, oh my God, 16 questions. Are there differences between right and left-handed speakers of sign languages? Can they lead to misunderstandings? So, not really. The second part of the question. Usually they don't lead to misunderstandings. If you're right-handed, so the right hand is your dominant hand and you use your right hand to sign, If you're left-handed, then your left hand is dominant and you just do the signs mirrored. So there are also deaf people who are left-handed and they just communicate as normally as the right-handed people. So actually the handedness is not a big deal. But it's important for the people who try to learn a sign language, and you need to be really careful not to mix the hands. So if you're right-handed, keep to your right hand. If you're left-handed, keep to your left hand. Because if you're changing hands in the conversation, it's not really well received, I would say. Yes. Will there ever be an international sign language, ASL, international sign? What about Signuno, Gestuno, the so-called sign Esperanto? Signuno, sorry. Okay. I could make another topic about that, but in this videos behind me you could see international sign. Actually, it was international sign mixed with ASL, because what is actually international sign? This is a sign language pidgin used by deaf communities or deaf people from various countries to communicate with each other. And depending on their native sign languages, they may use this kind of vocabulary or that kind of vocabulary. So, for example, this kind of international sign in the European environment looks a little bit different than the international sign in the Asian environment or African environment, I would say. So there is an international sign. It's not a full-fledged language because as I said, it's a sign language pidgin, and it's not taught to children. So it probably won't be creolized, but it's used on different occasions, such as sign linguistics conferences or WFD conferences, which is the World Federation of the Deaf, and also Deaf Olympics as well. ASL is also a language that is really common among especially young deaf people, because most of the content on the internet is in American Sign Language, similar to English in the world of spoken languages. So ASL has a big impact on the sign languages as well, and IS, so international sign as well. There are now many borrowings from international sign in the native sign languages, which causes a lot of discussions in the local deaf communities. What about Signuno? So Gestuno, okay, because there are two terms here. Gestuno was the first version of international sign. So in 1970s, the World Federation of the Deaf thought up, so they created a committee and they published a book with 1,700 signs for Gestuno, which would be an international sign, but it didn't catch on because many people thought it was too artificial. So then many changes happened to these Gestuno signs. We are now talking about international sign. Some researchers also say that there is that the international sign is in fact a full-fledged language, but that's being discussed right now in the sign language or sign linguistics community, I would say. And Signuno is the manual version of Esperanto, so it is not a full-fledged or a natural language like ASL or PJM or anything like that. It's a manual version of Esperanto. So all of the endings in Esperanto, had their own elements, and movements, and hand shapes represent different roots, so radicoi roots, and it's so there was one time that I actually looked up the manual for Signuno, and for me personally, it was really not understandable. So I don't know if there are some people who try to learn Signuno from this manual. I don't know anyone. Okay. Is there something like sign language families? For example, would the Czech sign language look like a lot more like the Polish sign language than the French one? That is a wonderful question. Thank you. So when it comes to sign language families, it works a little bit differently because in spoken languages, we have this, prerequisite or the situation that different groups moved from one place to another, and they also borrow and they are in contact with like neighboring communities, so a lot of borrowing happens and so on. So the spoken language families happen because of these migrations of people that happened a long, long time ago, and now we can see the effects of that. So we have like Indo-European languages and Austronesian languages and so on. But when it comes to sign language families, most of the sign languages that are used as official sign languages, these are called urban sign languages, and they were they were not created, but they came into existence, usually in the environment of deaf education centers and deaf schools. And the first modern deaf school in Europe was founded in the 18th century in Paris. So Charles Michel de Lepay and other teachers started using sign languages, or the French, this is called the Old French Sign Language, to teach the deaf children. And also they came up with some methodical signs to teach them French spoken language. And then teachers who wanted to found their own local schools came to Paris. They saw what happened there, and they tried to copy or implement these solutions in different schools as well. So then this method spread to Vienna, to Spain as well, and also to Warsaw and other cities as well. So in this case, in this European context, we can speak of a French sign language family because a lot of these solutions for the signs will also following the routes of these different teachers and so on and so on. But the sign languages families don't work the same as in spoken languages. So some sign languages are more similar to each other. For example, let's take ASL and the French sign language LSF as an example. So in 1817, Gallaudet traveled to Europe and brought a French teacher, Leclerc, to the US. And they founded the first school of the deaf in 1817. And as far as I remember, the American Sign Language was based on the French Sign Language, but it also had elements of the home signs, because when you have a deaf person being raised in a hearing family, or if we have like 2 or 3 deaf people, they also develop their own home signs. So also these home signs were added to this creation of ASL, and also the sign language of Martha Vineyard's Island, and the plain Native American Sign Language as well. So there are multiple elements that actually contributed to the creation of, or evolution of ASL. So ASL and French language are quite similar to each other, but BSL, that's another history. So BSL, British Sign Language, and American Sign Language are very, very different, because the British had their own teachers, had their own methods, and they also, so the signs are also very, very different. I don't know if I'm able to answer all of these questions, but I will try, sorry. So the sign languages evolved, the signers frown upon new usages by younger generations, slang, etc. of course, they do evolve, and it's really visible right now in the era of the internet. For example, in 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, a sign for the coronavirus spread like coronavirus itself, actually. So in practically all sign languages, the sign for coronavirus is this one. And it spread immediately. So, because in the first months of COVID-19 in Poland, interpreters and deaf people used to sign coronavirus, which is quite not really well accepted. But this new sign got accepted very quickly. As I said earlier, there are now many discussions when it comes to borrowings, especially from international sign. The discussions about that in the deaf community are also quite intense, I would say. So there are people who absolutely defend their own local languages. They say we should not sign like this, like in an international sign, because we have our own signs. So why should we borrow the signs? Yes. But when it comes to like younger generations, or like this slang, I'm not sure if older signers frown upon these inventions of the youth. I think, like, for example, the signs that older people use are very valued in the deaf community because they are like, they are also an element of the heritage and of the deaf culture, and is very, very well appreciated in the deaf communities. Sorry, which sign language is the international sign language closest to? Right now, I would say ASL, because a lot of vocabulary comes from ASL, but not only. Some of the vocabulary comes from the British Sign Language and German Sign Language as well. But as I said, in the international sign may have different forms depending on the people who use this pidgin. To what degree do the syntax of the sign languages correspond with the syntax of the languages spoken in the respective countries? Not really, I would say. So, for example, in the Polish Sign Language, the the constituent word order would be SVO. In Polish Sign Language, very often we have sentences as with the SOV, constituent word order. But as I said, many researchers also think that this word order actually is more reliant on the context and pragmatics than the syntax itself. But it does not mean that spoken languages do not have their impact on sign languages. They actually do. So if we have bilingual deaf people who are very well versed in both spoken Polish in the form of writing and in Polish Sign Language, it might happen that they borrow some expressions and some syntactical phrases from the Polish spoken language. Sorry. Do you know about any interferences or influence of sign languages on how deaf people write? Absolutely, yes. So, for example, when you go on Facebook or another social media and you follow some deaf groups, and when you read the comments, you can quickly see that this is written by a deaf person, because they have, it depends also on their knowledge of a spoken language, because some people know the respective spoken languages pretty well, and some others don't. It's due to education systems and education backgrounds and family backgrounds. There's multiple factors, actually. Each and every individual has their own individual history in this. So, but yes, if you know sign language and you read these comments, you can pretty well understand what they're trying to say. If you don't know sign language, I think you can have some problems with understanding these comments. Oh my God, it doesn't matter which hand you use. Would a mirrored video of someone sign be more difficult to understand? I think I answered this question in some parts. So keep to your dominant hand. And the mirrored video, I'm not sure. I would say that if you mirror a video, it wouldn't make such a great impact. But oh my God, so many questions. How mutually intelligible these sign languages are. It depends on, for example, when it comes to the context of Europe, the sign languages are understandable to some extent, and also I think deaf people have it easier to communicate with each other because many elements of sign language grammars are actually pretty similar. If the signs are different, they also come up with ideas to describe something visually. So, but when it comes to the respectful sign languages, I'm not sure about the percentage, so I don't want to lie. But let's say Polish and German sign language, I think maybe like 50% of intelligibility would be here, but don't take these percentages for granted. That's from my own experience, for example. How do you prevent mixing up different sign languages? I don't know. So, yeah, I think it's just... sometimes it happens to me that, because I also work as a Polish sign language interpreter, and sometimes when I sign, I also, it does not happen very often, but sometimes the first sign that comes up to my mind is from American Sign Language, not from a Polish Sign Language, and I have to be really careful about that. So yeah, sometimes it happens that I can't prevent mixing them up, but usually, use these signs in different, all these sign languages in different communities. So maybe that helps. How much easier is it to learn another sign language when you already know one? It's much easier because you already have this hardest part behind you. And usually when learning is another sign language, you have to, learn the vocabulary. Sometimes the grammar is different, but not that much, I would say. So it's much, much easier. How much is miming used? For example, storytelling with classifiers, for example, when you don't know the right words or grammar. Actually, this is an interesting question because in the research about the acquisition of classifiers, so the results say that classifiers themselves are actually acquired later than the vocabulary or these syntactic properties of a sign language. So usually children at 4 or 5 can use some basic classifiers, but only during your teenage years it happens that you fully master the art of using these classifiers. But if you don't use classifiers, you can just describe something more, visually, but then you also use classifiers, but not specific to a sign language, I would say. It's more like miming. Also, the thing is, when we use spoken languages, for example, right now I'm doing this all the time, we do not only use, words, phonetic words or sounds, we also use our hands. So these non-linguistic markers are added to these linguistic elements, but we can tell them apart. In sign languages, it's harder to tell them apart because both non-linguistic and linguistic elements are on top of each other. And sometimes it's not very discernible if some elements are an element of a sign language grammar or are they just, non-linguistic. Oh my God. Well, okay, what is the most effective way to learn a sign language for someone with a background in theoretical linguistics? I would say I wouldn't say that there is a specific. Let me control the time. I wouldn't say that there's a specific method. I think. So if you want to learn sign language, that's what I always tell. Find a local course with a local deaf teacher when it's possible, because you still have to, adjust your channel, so your reception channels. I think when you have backgrounds in theoretical linguistics, it might help in some ways, but that's not like necessarily a big advantage, I would say. Is it usually harder to sign or to understand signing? That's a good question, because the funny thing is that in spoken language interpreting, for example, we are taught to, most interpretations that happen are from a foreign language to your native language. But in sign language interpreting, it's the other way around. And they're not, so the situation is changing right now, but for example, in Poland, we don't have that many sign language interpreters that can interpret from PJM to Polish as from Polish to PJM. That is a paradox, I would say, but it's also really interesting, because also many factors are the issue here. I would say that it also depends on who signs. For example, if because some deaf people can use regional signs, or they can have this quick style of signing, very, very fluent, very quick, and then it might be harder to understand them than your deaf teacher, for example. I think it's similar to spoken languages in this regard. That question was already there. Do you have an experience with dialects in sign languages? Of course. So in many sign languages, there are regional variations. In Polish Sign Language, in BSL, so British Sign Language, and so on. In Poland, for example, I've been taught PJM in Warsaw, so I use Warsaw signs. But in Łódź, so in another city that is about 2 hours away from Warsaw, they use many different signs from the Warsaw ones. Also in Lublin, so in the eastern Poland, they have their own signs as well. It's not that they use a completely different vocabulary set, but some percentage is different. So definitely regional dialects exist, and also like socialects. So the sign language of the older people and the younger generations are also different from each other. Are there fewer signs or words in sign languages compared to spoken languages for words with similar meanings? For example, colors, red, crimson, scarlet. Okay, when it comes to manual signs, I would say yes. I would say yes, but when we want to differentiate between different shades of red, for example, different strategies would be used, for example, finger spelling or different mouthing. But, sign languages are relatively young, so up to 200 years, and they're also evolving, and we can expect that more signs are going to be created and used. That does not mean that sign languages are poorer than spoken languages. They're just different. But the fact is that when it comes to these manual signs, if we collected them, we would have fewer signs, for example, than words in the dictionary. Okay, I think we're out of time. I'm sorry that I didn't answer all of your questions because there are so many. If you have any questions, you can also I think you saw my social media, or you can just ask me here, whatever. Thank you so much.